The Vanishing Room, a true horror story part 1, the hotel that shouldn't exist. It started with a late-night drive and a mistake. In the fall of 2017, Daniel Carter, a traveling salesman, found himself on an empty stretch of highway somewhere in West Virginia. His GPS had died hours ago, and his phone showed nothing but a spinning loading symbol. The gas station he had passed earlier was long behind him, and the road ahead was endless, winding through miles of dense forest. That's when he saw a flickering neon sign, Pinewood Lodge, vacancy. Daniel swore there had been nothing there seconds ago. No town, no buildings, just an unbroken line of trees. But the sign buzzed softly in the cold night air, casting a sickly green glow on the pavement. He had no choice. He was exhausted, and his gas tank was nearly empty. He pulled into the gravel lot and parked. The hotel loomed before him, a tall, decaying structure, far too large for such a remote area. Its windows were dark, except for one on the third floor, which pulsed with dim, yellow light. The sign outside flickered violently, its buzzing growing louder. For a brief moment, the letters twisted, rearranging into something unreadable. No, not unreadable, but wrong. Like a name he had forgotten. Then, just as quickly, it returned to normal. Daniel hesitated. Something about the place felt wrong. But exhaustion won over paranoia, and he stepped inside. He would regret that decision for the rest of his life. Part 2, the room that shouldn't exist. The lobby was strangely pristine. The floors gleamed, the air smelled faintly of lemon, and a clerk, an elderly man in a crisp suit, stood behind the desk. Checking in, the man asked, his voice hollow. Daniel hesitated before nodding. Yeah. Just for the night. The old man smiled, but it never reached his eyes. He slid a key across the counter. Room 306. Daniel took it. The key felt too cold in his hand. He turned to head for the elevator, but something on the guest ledger caught his eye. The pages were blank. No other names. No past guests. Slow night? Daniel asked, forcing a chuckle. The clerk didn't respond. He just stared. Behind him, a large, antique mirror hung on the wall. Daniel felt an unnatural pull toward it. His stomach turned as he thought he saw another figure standing behind the clerk, tall, impossibly thin, with hollow, bleeding eyes. It didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, as if sensing his gaze, it slowly tilted its head toward him. Daniel blinked, and the figure was gone, leaving only his own reflection, which lingered a second too long before mirroring his movements. The elevator ride felt endless. The lights flickered as it ascended, the old machinery groaning under the weight of something unseen. When the doors opened, Daniel stepped out into a dimly lit hallway lined with peeling wallpaper and stained carpet. The air was thick, heavy, like walking through water. Room 306 was at the end of the hall. As he slid the key into the lock, he had the distinct feeling that someone was watching him. Then, the door swung open on its own. Part 3, the shadow in the mirror. The room was freezing. The temperature was at least 20 degrees colder than the hallway. The furniture was outdated but clean, the bed neatly made. A single mirror hung on the wall across from the bed. Daniel set his bag down and went to the bathroom to splash some water on his face. When he looked up into the mirror, he froze. There was something wrong with his reflection. His own face stared back at him, but the eyes, they were all wrong. Dark. Hollow. Watching him. His stomach twisted as the reflection tilted its head slightly, but Daniel hadn't moved. He turned away from the mirror, his heart pounding. But when he looked back, the reflection was smiling. A deep, guttural laugh echoed from the mirror, though Daniel's own lips hadn't moved. The room plunged into darkness. Part 4, the whispers in the walls. Daniel scrambled for his phone, but the screen was dead. The air thickened, pressing against his chest like an unseen weight. Then, the whispering started. Low, urgent voices seeped through the walls, overlapping, relentless. They spoke in a language he didn't understand except for one phrase, repeated over and over, "He sees you." Daniel lunged for the door, yanking it open and froze. The hallway outside had changed. The walls were rotting, the ceiling sagging as if something enormous crawled above it. The carpet was soaked, and the lights buzzed dimly. And at the far end of the hallway, a figure stood. It was him. A perfect copy of himself, standing motionless, watching. Then, it stepped forward. Part 5, The Vanishing Room. Daniel ran. He didn't know where, didn't care, he just needed to escape. The hallways twisted and stretched, turning in on themselves. The doors had no numbers now, only symbols scratched into the wood. Something was chasing him. He could feel it. He slammed into a stairwell door and sprinted down, taking the steps 2 at a time. The whispering grew louder, angry now, filling his head like static. Every shadow seemed to move, reaching for him. Then he was back in the lobby. But the front desk was empty. The hotel clerk was gone. Daniel didn't hesitate. He bolted for the entrance, expecting the door to be locked. But it swung open easily. And he was outside. His car sat where he left it. The sky was turning gray with the first signs of dawn. Daniel turned back to look at the hotel one last time. It was gone. The lot was empty, overgrown with weeds. There was no sign that a building had ever been there. He never spoke about it again. But sometimes, in the dead of night, he wakes to the sound of whispering. And in the mirror, his reflection watches him. It no longer waits for him to look, it moves before he does now. And sometimes, when Daniel turns away, he swears he can still see it out of the corner of his eye, standing just behind him.